حتى اليوم ما صدقنا حالنا، والله يحمي الجيش. أنا أولاد أخوي 2 شهداء.
شو رأيك بانتصارات حلب؟
يحضروا هالفرحة.
انتصار سوريا، شعب سوريا الله يحميهم، وإن شاء الله السلام والأمن قادم.
وبانتصارهم رح نحقق حلمنا ورح ندرس ورح نصير إعلاميين ودكاترة.
أنا بتمنى أشكر الجيش العربي السوري لأنه دافع عن وطنه، واليوم حررنا، واليوم هالرصاص اللي عم يطلع.
اليوم بدي نام وبكره مطبني اني حبعت ابني على المدرسه بدون ما تلفن واسال كيف الوضع.
It's been an extremely painful journey getting here. The most significant victory by pro-government forces for the duration of this conflict that's now lasted almost 6 years. Now, I've spent months in Aleppo in the last year, and the sense that I get from many people here that once they've done with their celebrations, that they are eagerly waiting to rebuild their homes, their families, and of course their city.
Let's get more on that from RT's William Whiteman. Well, thanks so much for joining us. So you've been monitoring what's been said in the media about liberation of Aleppo. So tell us the latest.
Well, I mean, we've just seen a report from Lizzie Phelan, who's there on the ground in Aleppo, who has been seeing the celebration. Obviously, there are some people who are unhappy with what's happened. I mean, obviously, this has been the cradle of the uprising against Assad. So there's obviously a strong anti-Assad element there among some part of the population. That being said, however, if you look at some of the headlines and reports that have been circulating in the mainstream media throughout the day, you get an incredibly different picture from the one which we just showed you, one of the potential mass murdering of pretty much everyone in Aleppo. We can have a look at some examples of this now.
100,000 people are trapped in the city. We're getting reports of executions, of very grim pictures emerging from inside Aleppo.
Tens of thousands of civilians are still trapped in the ever-shrinking rebel enclave.
Complete meltdown on humanity.
Picture of just how trapped these civilians are in Aleppo. If they stay at home, they could be killed.
Tens of thousands of people remain besieged, trapped in the war zone.
I mean, now, as well as this, we've been seeing very strong use of wording, specifically hundreds of thousands of people being trapped. Whereas we know that the militants in eastern Aleppo were currently holding around a sort of 3 square kilometres. So they would have to be incredibly densely packed for all those people to be trapped inside there. CNN reporting 100,000 people being trapped. The Russian military said that that number of people used to be held by the militants. They weren't free to leave. They were being kept there essentially as human shields. And not only that, but some of the headlines we've been seeing appear to also be predicting the massacre of all of these hundreds of thousands of people. Particularly in Al Jazeera, we've been seeing that even the word genocide is even being thrown around. Although in this instance, we're talking about the advance of the Syrian army. We're not talking about Islamic State, who have been carrying out genocides. Not saying that any sort of extra sort of killings have been carried out by the Syrian army. Of course, these sort of things happened. Also, we have another thing here with another comment that not exactly clear who these messages are from. Well, we've seen thousands of people leaving the besieged area. These are messages of people saying that their final goodbyes, as it were, as if they're expecting to be killed. These are journalists who are working in the area. We obviously remains to be seen what will happen to them, but this does seem to be overtly sort of grim, overtly over the top, given how other sieges have been handled once they've been liberated, the cities. We've also been seeing reports circulating today, specifically that Syrian troops carried out a massacre, an alleged massacre of 82 civilians. Women and children are said to have been included in the number. This is according to reports in the mainstream media. However, these reports seemingly state this as a fact, with bold headlines citing the UN, and certainly very strong messages have been sent to viewers here. However, the fact is that the UN is far less convinced, and instead are referring to sources that it considers to be reliable, but nevertheless it doesn't disclose. It also says that these reports are difficult to verify. We can have a look at this now.
Who is doing these killings? I can't say who's done all of them, but we understand at least one Iraqi militia is involved. We've heard of killings of civilians in this way in 4 different locations, so it may well be different forces involved.
So there, I mean, there you can see, I mean, that is far from the sort of the serious accusation which we're seeing levelled at the Syrian Arab Army at the moment. I mean, this is something which needs to be thoroughly investigated before these kind of inflammatory claims can be made.
Well, Will, thanks so much for now for watching the media and the reaction to what's happening in Syria there and bringing us up to speed. That was William Whiteman here with us in the studio. And let's now discuss this further with Amar Wakaf, a Middle East expert and a managing director of Gnosis Limited. Mr. Wakaf, thanks so much for joining us here on International. So the Western media are now running with headlines claiming that Syrian government forces have killed dozens of civilians on the spot, though the UN human rights spokesperson says it's currently impossible to say who's really responsible. So the question here is, why are mainstream outlets jumping to conclusions?
Well, the simple answer is that it falls into a much wider narrative about on dividing or looking at the crises in the entire region, really, Syria, Iraq, and so on and so forth, through the prism of Sunni Shiite sort of look. Now, if you forget Aleppo a little bit and think about the city of Mosul, everybody has been saying, well, the Shiite mobilization forces should not enter the Sunni city. It's pretty much the same narrative in Aleppo, because it's reinforcing certain fears of a population that has been under a lot of propaganda for the past 5 years, 6 years in Syria about the Shiites coming to destroy your lives, change your way of living, and so on and so forth. And now they are retaking your country. Now, I can tell you from a personal experience, a cousin of mine is a unit commander in Aleppo. He's been shot now and is recovering, Godspeed. Now, 90%, according to him, 90% of his troops or the unit members are actually from Aleppo itself. So we're talking about the people of Aleppo liberating their own city, in effect. Why would they kill civilians, for heaven's sake? But this is portrayed as Shiite, Iranian, Republican Guard, whatever it is, shooting Sunni people on the spot in order to make people, Syrian people in other places in Syria, fearful of reconciliation with the army and not giving any hints that they are willing to drop weapons and staying as much as possible on guard.
Well, Mr. Wakaf, speaking of Aleppo and its liberation, we've been showing how people were celebrating, the locals celebrating what's going on there. Why don't we see any coverage in major Western outlets showing people celebrating?
Because they wanted to portray it as a tragedy. I mean, I can tell you that if we go back a few days back, before this mass movement of civilians started from the eastern part or the eastern neighborhoods of Aleppo towards the western one, I've had reports from personal acquaintances as well and friends who currently live in western side of Aleppo, that people are jubilant because there is a sort of nightmare that has ended. In a sense, what happened 4 years ago when the Allahu Akbars arrived was that part of the population of eastern Aleppo managed to run away into the government-controlled areas, but part of them couldn't because they were not sure where to live, because they thought they might not be able to afford a very high price of a rental apartment, or they would have to evacuate to other areas where the government has control in Damascus, in the coastal area, and so on and so forth. And they thought that they might be able to go through this because they just, they're still having their salary from the government, by the way, and that's enough for them, and as long as they are under their own roof, to feed their family, children, and so on. But this has gone too long. But these people now feel liberated. They've tried, and there are confirmed reports that they've tried to flee before, but were prevented by fire from crossing into western Aleppo by those moderate sort of rebels. Now you tell me why the media, international media, has ignored all throughout the problem of Aleppo that 6 times the number of people actually exist in the western side of Aleppo, and part of whom are actually from eastern part of Aleppo, who had fled their homes in 2012 when the Allahu Akbars or the extremists arrived. They just want to put it as, look, the Assad is massacring his own people. They just want to ignore what is really happening in Syria and what the underlying issues are, which is basically that there is an Islamic international jihadi spirit that is coming into Syria in order to reformulate the whole country, and a lot of Syrians, including many Sunnis, even more than half of the Sunnis, in my opinion, are actually there against it.
Sorry for interrupting you there. Certainly a lot of questions as we see at this point, and not all of them will remain answered. Thanks so much for talking to us. We're running out of time, unfortunately. And that was Ammar Wakafa, Middle East expert and Managing Director of Gnosis Limited.
Thank you very much.